Hi, welcome to Color Speak. I'm so excited today because I have someone you will want to hear from. And if you're not already recognizing him, I have to tell you, you are in the minority because John Redenbo is my guest today. And he has agreed to come on and talk with me, Janet, on Color Speak about dream interpretation. He is the president and founder of Dream Life Decoded. And I'll tell you, he has such a long and rich history of so many experiences and things that he brings to the table that it just blows my mind. And here he is now today interpreting dreams for us because this is the season to do so. So, welcome to the show. I appreciate that you're here today, John.
So good to be with you, Janet. Thank you so much for interviewing me and taking the time to invite me on the show. I'm really excited.
I'm excited too. And it's you taking the time to be with me because before we started recording, John was telling me about his crazy schedule and all of the things he's doing and all of the travel right now. And he's meeting with very important people around the world to discuss dreams. So hold on to your seats, buckle in, because if you have not really delved into this subject matter, particularly since the world changed about 4 years ago, you're in for a ride because dreams still matter. And I love some of the things that John has said regarding dreams, like dreams are God's instructions. And so before we delve into that a little more, I told John I would ask him a bit about his past because one of the interviews he did with my friend Diana Larkin, you talked about, John, your time as in the military. You worked for the United States Navy and you began your career in nuclear physics. And I was fascinated when I heard about that.
Yeah, that was fun. I was actually graduated from a Christian high school in Ohio, and I was thinking about going to seminary. And somebody said, my parents actually recommended, why don't you join the military? You don't know that much about life. So learn about life first. And then we actually had a church on board the aircraft carrier. I was on the USS Abraham Lincoln during the first Persian Gulf War, Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Southern Watch. That was the liberation of Kuwait from Iraq. Really, really rich times. But yeah, I worked in nuclear propulsion, nuclear power, and we would fix and maintain and operate nuclear power plants on aircraft carriers and sometimes subs.
Wow. And I know that you had mentioned that you were really in the hot seat, so to speak, when it came to making some decisions, that you were the one on call that had to make some pretty intense decisions.
We stand rotating watches, rotating shift work when you're out to sea. It's either five and dimes, 5 hours on, 10 hours off, or 5 hours on, 15 hours off, typically. And so if you're the one on watch when stuff goes down, you're the person in the hot seat. And so I was in the hot seat on a particularly scary night because we were transiting through the Straits of Hormuz, and we were within missile range from several nations that were hostile to the United States. And the aircraft carrier is the flagship. It's where the admiral is. And so the 12, 13 other ships in the battle group kind of track off of the aircraft carrier. They're designed to protect the aircraft carrier in the event of an attack. And so they maintain a certain distance and proximity to the aircraft carrier. And we had one plant down and one other one was operating, and we lost 3 out of 4 electric generators. And I was on watch as what's called the load dispatcher. And so when that happened, you have to make a decision quick. And I made the decision to kill the last generator, which would force start the diesels, which would then allow us to recover. But as I did that, it also dropped the rods on the nuclear power plant of the only operating plant, which meant for a time we were dead in the water. No ability to propel through the water to move forward. And so not only was myself and the aircraft carrier and 88 planes and 6,000 men, but there were 12, 13 other ships, probably about 20,000 people in total, that were now stuck in this place at a very interesting time in the middle of a war. And so it's not a desirous place to be, but in retrospect, Whenever you do something like that of that magnitude, they always do a postmortem. They'll always go back and be like, did this guy do the right thing? Did he make the right decision to drop the final generator and thus drop the final operating nuclear power plant, make us dead in the water with a loss of all AC, and then recover from there? Was that the fastest way to recover? And usually they'll fly in even people from Washington, and they'll sit down and they'll go over that with you. And the only comment was, the watch officer next to me looked at me when I made the decision, and he said, you dropped two plant, right? And I'm like, yeah. And I went, and it's interesting because when you're in that mode, you've been trained as the person on the spot as the specialist, and nobody else knows your job. The guy next to you can't do it. The captain can't do it. Your department head, the captain, will come down sometimes and watch, especially when something like that happens. They go to central control, which is where I was. And a lot of times the captain of the ship will come down, and even the admiral will come down, but they won't say anything. They'll just stand behind you and watch you. They just kind of want to let their presence be known that, hey, we're in the midst of a crisis here, and we're in a vulnerable spot, and we need to be able to both operate and move and power. And of course, if you have planes in the air, you can't land planes. And so people's lives can literally be in danger when an event like that happens. And so they want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to do what you need to do to recover quickly. And so when that happens, you take the phone off the hook and you focus on the problem, and it takes, an hour and a half to give all the instructions to all the different parties all over the ship to do what you need to do to recover and put the loads and the breakers back and all that stuff. So it was definitely made for a memorable night.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah, that's wild. I have little exposure to that world, but I did share with you earlier that growing up in San Diego, it was impossible, especially back in the day, to be in that city and to grow up in, when it was kind of a smaller town, not know someone in the Navy or Coast Guard. So I had quite a number of friends and acquaintances that were serving. And I guess the only thing I can think of that came to mind when you were talking to me about that, of course, I've seen all of the movies because my husband is just a buff when it comes to military movies. But I just kept thinking of, even though it has nothing to do with it, because it was a Minecraft destroyer, a miner, I guess they call it, down in World War II, the Caine Mutiny. I always loved that book. It won a Pulitzer and a movie was made. And I don't know if you ever saw it, but
Yeah.
Humphrey Bogart played the bad guy. He
Yeah.
was, yeah, it was good. Anyway, okay, well, I'm off into the weeds. John, so I've read your bio, and I know that you've had a wealth of experience professionally outside of military service. And by the way, thank you for your service. How
Mhm.
did you get to interpreting dreams? How did that happen? That's pretty wild.
It's a long and sordid tale, as they say.
Okay.
I wrote one dream down when I was 13. I wish I would have wrote more down as a kid. But in 2003, for some reason, I don't even know if I remember. I don't remember why, but I started writing my dreams down. And as I did, um, I started getting more and more into them. And then a situation happened related to a professional situation and a relationship. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And I didn't know what to do. And a friend of mine said, why don't you ask God a question? Hey, should I be a part of this event? And then ask him to answer you in a dream. And I'm like, what? You can do that? And he's like, yeah, of course. And so I did. And I had, I think, 4 or 5 dreams that night, which then led me on a track to get on a plane, fly to Nashville, go to the event, meet the people. And it ended up turning out actually better than expected. And I think one of the dreams, or one of the dreams that I'd written down during that time, came to pass almost exactly as I saw it in a dream.
Well,
And so I was really excited. And so I'm writing down reams of paper, all of my dreams, tracking everything, feeling like God is leading me in a particular direction. Um, and it didn't work out the way that I thought. In fact, at the end of it all, which was like a several-year journey, I became kind of disillusioned with dreams. And I said, dreams are stupid. I'm a scientist. I work in nuclear power and nuclear physics. And then after that, I went into finance, and so I don't have time for fluff. Like, if it doesn't work, that's great. If people want to get emotional and excited, and those church people, they kind of get a certain way about certain things. And I'm like, look, is the cancer gone or not? Like, if it isn't, great, but we need to do something else. And so so I was just kind of no fluff guy. And I'm like, well, whatever people think about dreams, it didn't work for me. And so I just kind of took all my dream journals, threw them in a book, and threw them in the back of the closet. And this was probably 15 years ago now. And then I'm walking around like, apparently, like I have a sign on my head, because people would say, hey, do you know anything about dreams? Like, that's an odd question. Why would you ask me that? I'm a business guy. I'm in a finance company, strategy consultant. Why would you ask me about dreams? Oh,
Holy
I don't know. I just dream came to mind. Can I tell you my dream? And I'm thinking, I don't want to talk about dreams. Dreams are stupid. I've written off dreams. Dreams are dumb, And I'd be like, okay, tell me your dream. And they'd tell me their dream, and something would come to mind. And I'd say, I don't, kind of reminds me of this. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, how did you know? And this happened with my dad, and that, and I'm just like, dude, I don't want to get into your dreams. Like, thanks for sharing. I'm good. Can we talk about something else?
No psychoanalyzing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it happened over and over and over again. And so I'm just like, why does this keep happening to me? This is dumb. And as it did, I met more and more people. I worked in funding churches and funding some nonprofits and mission spaces and all kinds of stuff, movie projects, tech companies, whatever. And so I knew a lot of people in the prophetic community. I knew a lot of people in the church world. But again, I just didn't really see a lot of value in dreams. But I started meeting a bunch of people that really cared about dreams, a bunch of prophetic people, and we would end up talking about dreams, and people would tell me their dreams. And like I said, it just would seem like a thought. It wasn't anything that I thought was super significant. I would just be like, I don't know, maybe it means this. And people would be blown away. And the more and more it got to higher and higher levels of people in the prophetic, I'm like I thought they knew this. I thought, why would anybody ask me my thoughts on a dream? They're prophetic. Wouldn't they be able to understand what their dream meant? And I found that that's not necessarily the case. Being prophetic does not equal a dream interpretation ability. In fact, a lot of people call guys like Joseph and Daniel prophets, and I would challenge that mode of thinking, because they weren't primarily prophets at all. Actually, they were primarily seers and interpreters. But we just kind of lump everything in with talking about the future into the prophetic. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, Joseph and Daniel, they also get compared to serial entrepreneurs. These were government employees. The last thing Joseph and Daniel were serial entrepreneurs. But again, people see a gift and they want to lump it in. Well, these guys are this and these guys are that. Joseph and Daniel were prophets. They would tell you they weren't. I guarantee it. But looking at that and seeing people in the prophetic that were somehow, for some reason or another, saw value in what my thoughts were on their dream, it was just beyond me. But as it kept happening over and over again, I met people that I really respected their journey with God and their view of the prophetic. And so I'm like, if they're telling me that they like something I'm doing, or they think I have a gift, maybe I should, I don't know, press into it, learn about it, do something, instead of just telling people, no, I don't know how to do dreams. And so I was like, well, what would it see? There's a point I believe in the purpose and destiny of somebody's life where God shows them a little bit about who they are. And as he does, there's the opportunity to, and what a lot of people do is they ignore it. No, that's not who I am. No, that's not,
Yeah.
I think they get to a point where they finally accept it, but it's kind of neutral. Like, well, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And then I think there's a place beyond that where it's beyond acceptance, where they take it on as a calling. And at least this is how it works for me. And then they say, okay, now I'm going to lean in. If this is what I'm supposed to be, then I ought to study this a little more. What does scripture say about dreams? What are the top dreams in the Bible? What are demonic dreams about, or soul dreams? Or, I'd always heard that there were 3 types of dreams. Found that actually not to be the case. But it all came through studying and doing a deep dive into wanting to understand more because other people said, we really feel like this could be a gift or a calling for you.
Yeah, and I would have to agree with that because I've heard you interpret dreams on the air with Diana and with Ash, and you have really quite a grasp of it pretty quickly. You don't have to give it really a whole lot of thought. You're already taking notes and you have ideas. And so I was wondering, do you think of yourself now more as a dream interpreter or a dreamer? Because I know Ash is, when you've talked to Ash about his dreams, and by the way, I should say thank you, Ash, for introducing us formally.
Thanks, Ash.
Yeah, he's such a great guy.
Yes.
So blessed to know you both through Diana. Um, I noticed that he seems to be the one that's doing the dreaming and you're the one that's interpreting.
Yeah.
Is that generally how it works for you now? You're the interpreter, not the dreamer so much?
I'm both. I usually dream 2 to 6 times a night. And Ash is developing quite coming into his own on the dream interpretation side, which is really, really cool. He's a trusted colleague. He's definitely somebody that I love being on a show with or interpreting with, and you can see how God speaks to him and the thoughts that he's getting to. You're going to see a lot more of Ash
Mhm.
related to what we call spiritual intelligence, which is dream interpretation, but it's dream interpretation like you've seen on Diana Larkin, where it's not, oh, well, God just wants you to know he loves you and pray more.
Mhm.
It's like an hour and a half decode of a political or geopolitical
Mhm.
event in a dream.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I've had that firsthand experience with Ash. He's really got a gift. So yeah, I'm excited to hear more from him
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about those demonic dreams. So what would you say to someone who said, because I always believed that nightmares were demonic and not from the Lord. And I had had experiences where when my kids were little, they were screaming out, and I would go in and say, in the name of the Lord Jesus, I rebuke you. Anything that is not of him, any unclean spirit is not welcome here. Leave. And then my kids would sleep better. So what would you say to that?
Well, the best way that I found to describe this, and I've gone so many rounds with so many mothers in particular,
I'm sure.
who have said, you're saying God wants to scare my 3-year-old, and the best way to say it is this. In the movie theater of your dream life, only God holds the keys to the projection room. So what that means is, could there be a demonic entity in your house? Yes. Could there be one in your kid's room? Very much so. Could God be telling them, giving them a dream that they're fighting a demon or there's a monster in their closet? Absolutely. Why? So they'll wake up and they'll say, Mommy, and you'll come in and you'll rebuke anything that's not of God in the room.
Hmm.
Now, the misconception is that the enemy has the power, or what I call even the technology, to crawl into our subconscious mind and make us see anything he wants us to see while we're dreaming. And my premise is, if that's the case, wouldn't we all see Freddy Krueger on repeat every night and never get any rest? Number one. Number two, he's not God, and he's not the opposite of God. He's not omniscient. He's not omnipresent. There's nothing that I've ever been able to find in scripture that even suggests the idea that the enemy can even read our mind,
Mhm.
let alone crawl into it and put in the thoughts that he wants us to see. If that's the case, that's a game changer. That changes absolutely everything we think we know about dreams. Everything. Because if dreams come from God, if all dreams come from God, then dreams are immeasurably important to every area of our life. And we can prove it. We wouldn't be in the quantum age if God didn't give Einstein a dream when he was a kid that he mulled over for 3 decades before developing the theory of relativity. Google wouldn't exist if it wasn't for a dream. The most re-recorded song in world history, Yesterday by Paul McCartney. He walked around humming and singing it for 6 months, asking his friends who wrote the song. And they're all like, dude, we don't have any idea what you're talking about. Just write the dang thing. And he finally did. And like I said, it's one of the most successful songs ever. The Bohr model of the atom, for which he won the Nobel Prize in physics. Theory of relativity won the Nobel Prize in physics. So everything from billion-dollar conglomerates and entire industries that were created to entirely new ways of thinking about science and technology, and how many downloads like revelations or worship songs or prophetic things have happened because of dreams. There's so much proof. One of the things I love to study is the dreams of presidents. And it's interesting how God will speak to a king or a chief executive of our nation. When we look at Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible or Pharaoh, that's one thing. But when you can look up a dream that a US president had, and then you can interpret it and see what God was saying to a chief executive, like during the Civil War, like when he spoke to Lincoln
Right.
multiple times, then you start to be like, wow, this is super interesting. And presidents, particularly in crisis and wartime, during times of tumult in a country, they're looking for answers. They want people to stop dying. They want peace. They want the suffering to end. And so they're reaching out and crying out and doing anything they can. We think of George Washington at Valley Forge in 1777, and God sent him 3 visions, the 3 great woes. We think of Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, where God warned him of his death, not once, but 3 times. And so what was it a warning? Was he supposed to be able to not go to Ford's Theater on April 14th, 1865? Not necessarily. But it's interesting from a historical perspective that God was likely preparing him at minimum. We think a lot of times and it's easy to get stuck in this line of thinking. We think of a death or a terrorist action or 9/11 or a national security event that surely God would want to tell us that information in advance so we could prevent it. And that's not necessarily always the case. What if there was something that was going to happen anyway, and maybe it was, I don't know, part of the will of God for it to happen? And you can get theologically into some gray spaces there. But let's just say something was going to happen, and God said, I want to put in the midst of this story about how I spoke to people or showed people using dreams that this was going to happen. Not so it could be prevented, but maybe so they would be prepared. And so we've seen God do that over and over and over again. And he's done that with major political events. He's done that with different things. But it's fascinating when it happens, because what it does is it creates a history. If it's personal, it creates a history with you. And if it's historical, it creates a history like in the nation. The fact that God does speak to presidents of countries and presidents of the United States and tells them certain things. And it's interesting because wouldn't a president now want to know about that history? And that very premise itself is actually proved historically.
Yeah, I mean, there's no refuting that. And I've heard some of what you've had to say about dreams that, for example, Lincoln has had. And I do recall, I lived in the Valley Forge area when I went to school at Philly. Well, I lived in that area, Philly. And I'd heard about those dreams. So that is extremely interesting. One of the things I was going to ask you, I had 2 questions, and then I want to get into this concept, this broader concept that you adhere to, of all of our dreams mattering right now. And let me just back up and say first, I am one of those that is kind of late to the party, I guess. I mean, I've always had dreams, but I've always dismissed them as inconsequential. I remember significant dreams, very significant dreams. One of a demon at the end of my bed when I was a child. I remember exactly what it looks like with the wingspan and all of the things.
Wow.
And, I've worked through what that is all about, including some others. I mean, I saw a family member in hell, basically, when I was a child. But I always dismissed those as inconsequential. And then as I got older, of course, those kinds of things that happen when your mind is at rest and you're kind of musing over the day and you've talked to somebody or you've had a certain food or whatever, and it all sort of molds the type of dream that you would have. So I guess my question is, what happens when you dream about someone you've just had contact with or that you're listening to? For example, even just the other night, I fell asleep. Well, I actually was in first thing in the morning. My husband left on a business trip. It was 3 a.m. I go back to sleep, or I think I'm going to. I can't go to sleep. So I start watching Elijah streams and I hear Steve Schultz and Johnny Enlow talking, and I fall asleep. Well, the next thing you know, I'm in a room with the both of them talking. So how does that work? What is God doing in that case? Isn't it just about the fact that I was just listening to them? How did they end up becoming a dream?
I love this discussion. It's the same premise when parents tell their kids, don't watch scary movies at night because you'll dream about them. Sort of is what I say.
Hmm.
I heard people talk about Game of Thrones, and I hadn't watched it. And so during 2020, I decided to binge watch the whole series, Game of Thrones. And I noticed I started dreaming about the rise and fall of nations and kings and queens and leaders and dragons. But you know what I didn't dream? I didn't dream along the storyline of Game of Thrones. I dreamt about the setting. I don't even know that I dreamt about the people per se, but I knew there were dragons in my dreams, and I knew that, there was political maneuvering and, like I said, rise and fall of nation kind of stuff. Um, it goes back to, I want to write a book sometime called Why Old Men, based on the premise.
Great title.
Yeah, right. Your young men will see visions, your old men will dream dreams. Why old men?
I've
And
asked
this is
that.
a question I've
Yeah.
mulled over for years. And I actually have video footage of John F. Kennedy giving a speech, and he quotes this verse. And so to hear it in his voice in
Hmm.
black and white saying, where young men see visions and old men dream dreams, the Bible says. And then why old men? And I'll tell you why, because the seer realm, there's a palette in the seer realm. And I learned this from children. I talked to a 7-year-old one day, and she wanted to tell me the worst dream she's ever had in life. And it was a dream she had when she was 4. And so this kind of relates back to the whole idea of being a kid and having scary dreams, right? And so I'm like, what the heck does God talk to a 4-year-old about?
Hmm.
And apparently it's bouncy houses and cartoon characters. But she says this, she said there were 3 bouncy houses. The first one was small and it was easy. What do you mean it was easy? She said, I went in, there was a snake in it. I kicked him in the head. So she's talking about it. She said the second one was a little harder. There were several cartoon characters in there. It took me a while to beat them. So she's talking about levels of spiritual warfare, like they're progressions in a video game,
Is
but
that
they're
what she's
involving
playing?
cartoon characters and bouncy houses.
Is that what she's playing though? Do you think maybe she was accustomed to playing games, so God was speaking to her basically in her language?
I've never heard of a game where you go into a bouncy house and kick a snake in the head,
Well, yeah, I think that's true.
or
Yeah.
where you fight cartoon. I think the idea of video gaming is what she related it to, because she talked about easy, hard, and then the hardest, which was her worst fear, you know. So I think the progression is something that she certainly understood. But this is when I realized, is it possible that God uses games to teach kids, or dreams to teach kids spiritual warfare? Can
Wow.
dreams be literally a virtual reality spiritual warfare machine? Absolutely, they can. And we've seen this with adults that have recurring dreams. You ever have a dream you're chased? I know people that dreamt all the time. I had a dream I was being chased and I would run into the middle of my mom and dad's house, and then I would wake up. Well, do you know it was chasing you? No. Well, next time you have the dream, turn around. And they turn around and they see it's like a 7-year-old little girl who just goes and flops her pigtails and runs away. And they never needed to be afraid at all. And then they never have the dream again. And so you can go in and you can unpack what that is. And in that particular case, this young lady, what she was afraid of was herself and her inner child. And it's not a psychoanalysis thing. It's actually a biblically based, Holy Spirit fueled word of knowledge style of dream interpretation. This is why we don't like to use dream dictionaries, because I want to hear from God, and you got to discern from God. How did Joseph know 3 clusters of grapes was 3 days and 7 fat cows for 7 years? even if there was a rule in a dream dictionary, and this is not a rule, but if there was, that all numbers are units of time, well, how do you know if it's seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades, millennia? Nobody knows. So you still have to discern whether it's years or days. Why don't you just discern what it is entirely? But there's entire books written out about every number means this and everything means this. And the two biggest examples scripturally are the lion and the snake. People think of the lion's good, the Lion of Judah. Really, it says the enemy prowls around like a roaring lion seeking who he may devour. And people generally think snakes are bad because of the Garden of Eden, but really they put the snake up on the pole in the desert and it gave them healing when they looked to it. So if you see a lion or a snake in a dream, the first thing you have to figure out is it good or bad?
Mm-hmm.
And if you go with what a dream dictionary may tell you. So I am unconventional. I didn't buy, like when I finally decided, I didn't decide. I finally listened to what my friend said, that you really have something here. You really ought to lean into it. And I started saying, well, I want to study scripture. I noticed that I hadn't really taken a dream class or read a dream book, but I'd heard people teach on dreams and say things like there's 3 types of dreams. And so when God challenged me, I went to find every demonic dream in scripture. There's none.
I was going to say there aren't any. Yeah.
There's none at all. And there's horrifying dreams. There's dreams of kids dying. There's dreams where God promises genocide. You and all your people are dead. All your people means kids, means women, means families. That's the first dream. God comes out of the gate and promises a human trafficking king that he's going to wipe out him and all his people. And so it's interesting because a lot of times when I have discussions about dreams, people say things like, well, God would never. And the 2 most common ones are scare kids or give me a sex dream, because we relate images in our mind related to sex as being a sin or being lustful. And so, well, what if you didn't put it there?
So that was another one of my questions. When you dream something you would never do in real life, something that's compromising like that, what's that all about?
We have to come to the place where we realize that we probably don't know God as well as we think we do. When people say things like God would never, they're almost always wrong. God is 100% into shock value. 100%. He doesn't have the motion picture of association rating. He's not going to be held to a little NC-17 or G or PG. He doesn't play that game. And so you could have, and I know a lot of people that have had very explicit sexual dreams that will make you extremely uncomfortable. But you'll remember it and you'll probably talk about it. And how many other dreams do you not remember, and thus they're buried on the ash heap of history? We never hear of them again. We don't write them down. We don't talk about them. I so passionately have researched dreams scripturally. And then I spent about 2 years researching dreams in the Bible after God challenged me that all dreams came from him. And I just didn't believe it. I'd never heard that. And so I wanted to, trust but verify. After that, I spent about the next 2 years only interpreting nightmares. People would say, oh, hey, I had a dream. I don't want to hear your dream. I want to hear the worst nightmare you've ever had in life, ever. And I've said that to probably hundreds of people. And I've heard some real doozies. Not one of them, without exception, and now in 20 years of doing this, there's not one single exception to the idea that all dreams come from God. Now, there can be fake dreams, and a false dream is such a minority, but it's when somebody says, I had a dream, and they didn't have the dream. But dreams that come from God, they're all 100% is what I've seen. Dreams come from God. And if you discover that as a premise, then when you can prove it both biblically and experientially, it becomes very, very powerful now, because now the matter is settled. Now I have to spend zero amount of time wondering, well, first of all, is this a God dream or a demonic dream? Because the next question takes you out of the spirit realm.
Right.
Well, how did you feel? Oh, really? You think God communicates to you based on how you feel? That's interesting. You ever see a mom yell at a kid who's about to put their hand on a hot stove? Oh, but my mom would never yell. Oh, okay. Run out in front of a car and see what your mom would never do.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
God will give you a warning in a dream.
Well, I have so many questions for you, and we talked about the fact that I wanted to share a couple with you
Uh-huh.
of dreams of mine. I did start keeping a dream log, I think back in 2020.
Wow.
Actually, before I even understood what was happening in the world, we've all changed so much in the last few years. But I knew that there was some significance, and I never really understood at first, well, should I be interpreting it, or just I have the dream and someone else interprets? Anyway, I so many questions I have for a later date, but the one that I really wanted to share with you was it was about my friend and I, Karen. I shared with her, and so she was really excited to hear me run this by you because I've been meaning to run it by you, so might as well do it here. Okay, so it seemed like, okay, so backing up about this time, this was on Sunday, April the 28th of this year. And
Okay.
I, what's interesting is, anyway, I started after listening to you and listening to Diana, I became less inclined to think of my dreams as meaningless
Mhm.
and more I found that I was taking ownership in that I knew that the Lord was trying to communicate with me because there were things that he was telling me during the day that were just radical. I mean, just all of a sudden I would hear something and then it turned out it was something to do with something I was maybe questioning in the news. I'm still doing some morning news anchoring. So anyway, so anyway, all of that having been said, that was part of it. So it seemed like it was a Hunger Games sort of vibe. Karen and I were taken with a group of women and made to be incarcerated in a house. The house was large and it had many different rooms to sleep in, and it seemed like it was an odd collection of furniture in a way that you would find in a halfway house. It was eclectic, many different styles. We were told to find a place to bunk. Karen and I went into one room and agreed to claim a queen-size bed with a dark wood headboard and a baseboard that looked a little bit like a sleigh. We didn't lay down because the next thing I knew, we were fast forwarded into time and made to walk through a concrete maze that was claustrophobic and very dark with very little light. I started to freak out, but then calmed myself in Christ because I heard the name Jesus. We came out on the other side and it was a different sort of camp, and we're standing against a fence on a small green hill. It seemed hopeless, like we were at a concentration camp. But I told Karen, I said, we need to trust Jesus no matter how this looks. And I remember feeling in my soul, despite an overwhelming dark feeling of hopelessness, that we were going to be okay. We were back inside again and gathered in a common area. And I knew in my heart there was a weeding out, that we were all under inspection and that our personalities would dictate whether we survived or not. I didn't see any men, but only older women that were militant leading the charge. And I told Karen, we just need to play the part. We don't need to speak much at all or be defiant, but just act sweet and compliant so we may live.
Wow. There's a lot here. Like several hours of work.
Okay.
um, I think in short, what God is talking about is the national tenor. I think he's talking about the nation. I think he's talking about the way things are going, the way things feel. Um, the Hunger Games, like starting out with the Hunger Games kind of premise, and then being in jail, the halfway house, the bunk, the queen bed, the sleigh. I think all of these are really interesting settings where they're taking you to a place where they're creating like a juxtaposition to real life. And the weirder things have gotten lately, it seems like a lot of this is not that far off, you know.
Mhm.
It's interesting. I always start out and let people know that I don't have the answers,
Mhm.
but God does. And God wants you to know what your dream is about. Um, I thought the sleigh was interesting because I saw it as like a sleigh ride, you
Mm.
know, almost like little girls sitting on the end of a bed, pretending that they're going, just in their imagination, like in a Disney movie, we're going on a ride and God's about to take you on a trip somewhere. Um, the dark place, which was the maze concentration camp feel, even the green hill. I think it's really interesting. I think that's a wink to the world we live in is because of decisions made in the past. Um, and it's taken us to a place where, in a sense, people are entrapped or in prison, literally a concentration camp when a national focus has been set in a direction where um, there's a whole lot of policy and tenor and discussion about things like sin. Then it creates, we camp out at those places and it shifts a nation, a lot of times negatively, very much so. Now you can look at the policies that we have, even under certain administrations,
Mhm.
and how they've decided we're going to pick a focus here, and one tiny little small percentage people group is going to make the rest of us say lies about them because it supposedly is compassionate and makes them feel better,
Mhm.
and then from then on, it's just crazy town.
Mhm.
Well, if I can be anything I want, then I can be a dinosaur, I can be a tree, I can be and now suddenly schools have to change policy. The military has to shift their policy. We got just people that really need, frankly, mental health help,
Yeah.
um, are leading our nation and are supposed to be at the heads of things like healthcare. I mean, it's just a mockery. It's just a joke, and the sad thing is I don't think most of the nation gets that, that it is a joke, that they're throwing it in our face, that they're trying to push to see how far they can go. That probably, I don't know that a lot of serious people really believe these issues, but they know that it's destabilizing, and they know that in the midst of people who are putting up everything related, like the Olympics. It's interesting. The only way that I found out anything about the Hunger Games part of the Olympics is because all my Christian friends, not all of them, but a whole lot of my Christian friends decided to tell the world and repost picture after picture after picture of how evil the Olympics was. I wouldn't even know it. I don't
Mhm.
have time to watch the Olympics. And with the stuff that the Olympic Committee has decided to do on not protecting women in sports, I have
Exactly.
zero desire to watch the Olympics.
Mhm.
But I had to see it constantly fill my Facebook feed because people have taken a distraction, and that's what it is. It's a distraction. And they've decided to champion it and promote it. Because when you show pictures over and over and over again, I don't even have time to read what they're saying. They're probably condemning it and saying how gross it is and saying how God will not be mocked and all of these things. But I just go right on to the next thing. But you know what they've done is they've just remarketed a distraction, and they're unwillingly and unknowingly touting and championing events. They're focusing the national level of concentration to camp out on a particular era or on a particular nasty, disgusting thing that has happened or somebody did. Christians do this categorically. I'm shocked that we haven't figured this out yet, that we haven't been able to see we're not going to camp out here. And I think this is a part of what you're talking about. I think the media does this intentionally. They do it with malice, with intent to distract. So power structures and people with money who run media companies can do moves that they want to do. And there are journalists, and I know you're a journalist, and there are journalists that I believe that have a great heart. I know a lot of journalists that have a great heart that really want to fight the good fight. And they've had to make decisions like, I can't work for a mainstream media company because they don't care about the truth. This is what friends of mine have said. Whether it's Fox or CNN, it doesn't even really matter. It's just the politics of getting a message that, well, we don't want to say that. Well, we don't want to come against those people. And
Right.
so I think it's really
It's always
interesting.
been.
Huh?
That's the way it's always been. I remember being in a television newsroom in San Diego back in the early 90s, and I was going through the Rolodex of stories that we could use that are saved for a rainy day if you have nothing else going on. And I found something that was kind of cool. And oh no, the news director said that we can't do that. Why? Well, because that's a sponsor of ours. So even just 20 years ago, it was fairly obvious that stories weren't getting told if they didn't jibe with what management had in mind. But
Yeah.
that's an interesting point that you make, because I was one that somebody posted it and I reshared it. I just felt like I've been studying the occult and all of that for years when the Lord told me years ago to start learning about it. And um, so I've recognized signs, symbols, and what have you in all kinds of things from years ago when I would stand and watch a Super Bowl game and say, oh my gosh, I don't know who put that together, but somebody knows all of the satanic symbols. It's very intentional. And I think it's important to create awareness, but not to camp down there. So when I reshared that, I had some people coming at me and I just left it alone. I just moved on to the next thing. I'm not willing to die on that hill. But I do
Right.
think it's important that, I mean, as a church, that's an interesting perspective that you just gave, because I think that we need to create awareness, because most people don't realize how manipulated they are and how much of that is prevalent in our society and the subliminal messages that are being sent. But how do we do that without literally throwing our tent pegs down and, settling in? So
Yeah.
that's I want to I also want to share another dream with you if you don't mind, and this one is on my computer, and this one is more interesting. Oh, it says I can't minimize it during the meeting. um Gosh, it was so okay. Let me see if I can remember it. So this is fascinating. So this is just literally a couple of nights ago, and I was very intentional. Yeah, it was like 2 nights ago, right? Yeah, that was the one where my husband left. It was 3 a.m. I started to have that first dream. Okay, so then I had a second dream. I had a dream that night that it was so strange. I'm in a van with other people, and we're driving through a suburban neighborhood, and it's very green. There are green lawns and green trees. The houses are set back from the sidewalks, and they're middle class, nice houses. And I think I'm in the van with my daughter and perhaps her children behind us, which makes me think I'm in Dallas. And in the middle of the street are two lions, massive lions. And I discern immediately they are very evil. One is a lioness, and the other is a male lion. And they are eating a bloodied carcass in the middle of the road that I cannot identify. But I become immediately alarmed because here we are in suburban America, and this is what's going on. And all of a sudden, I'm flooded with all kinds of emotion about protecting everyone around us. And I said, we need to drive fast by that scene. And I don't know whether I was driving or she was driving, but the person that I was with said, I think we need to drive slow so as not to gain attention for whatever reason. The next thing you know, we are all in a house in that neighborhood right there in that area where the lions are consuming whatever they're consuming. And there are a lot of other people who are seeking shelter there. And I noticed that it's a Japanese family that has welcomed us in. And I go to the restroom, I extract myself from the rest of the people that are in the front room. And as I look out the window, I look down and there's a beautiful terraced area that kind of goes down to another level as if I'm looking from up high. And along the top of this level, I see the lion, the male lion, and he is angry and he wants to kill. It's not a matter of eating. It's about he wants to destroy I got the sense, every living thing that he can get a hold of. And I see a Japanese woman and a young boy walk out the back door. And I'm terrified because I think maybe she doesn't know. Maybe she's part of this family that doesn't understand that we're all up here in the front and we're taking refuge. So I run out of the bathroom. I think I try to gently call out of the window to her without making a whole lot of noise because I know that lion's right there. But I try to warn her and I run around to the backside through like a kitchen to the back door and I get her inside. And I go to close the door and I know the lion's coming. I know he sees us and he's on it. But what's interesting is though I noted the decor in the bathroom and I thought this is really very nice and modern and Asian and but the door was different. The door was an old-fashioned white wooden screened door that seemed flimsy, and I knew it was never going to support any kind of protection against the lion that was coming at me. And as soon as the woman and the boy came in, we got the door closed. The lion is right there. I can see a sliver, and he's going to get in, and I'm calling for help. And at that point, I feel like the dream ends, but I feel like I'm getting help with that. I feel like there's other people that are coming and perhaps a man of some kind that was there to help close the door. Which the
Wow.
reason I mentioned that one is it's really interesting because that was the night the stock market crashed. And the
Yeah.
Japanese angle with that, I thought, oh my gosh, I better mention this to you.
Yeah. What I'd love to do is table this dream for another time because there's so much here. It's related to JFK
Oh yeah.
because it's Dallas. It's related to things in DC. It's related to a dream two other prophets have had, one about a lion, one about the JFK thing. So I don't even want to touch this dream until we get a chance to unpack it at a much deeper level. This is a very, very serious and important dream. I'd love for you to send this to me in writing because, like I said, this ties with one of the things we do is we look at dreams that other people are having, and this ties to that, and that it definitely needs further study.
Okay. Well, what's interesting about that too is when I went to sleep, I asked the Lord for a dream
Mhm.
significant. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And that was what I wanted to also share with everyone is what you're doing. That's so, it's just so cool. It's so revolutionary to my mind that you're looking at everyone's dreams and every one of us, you talked about the old man, but I just think about the first part of that verse where he says, in those times, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. So we're all hearing, we're dreaming, we're having visions, and lest we think that ours doesn't matter or it's insignificant, I think it's interesting that you're compiling all of that information.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It's amazing what we're
Yeah.
what, what we're doing and we're seeing in dreams.
Well, I so appreciate you coming on today, John. It was such a pleasure. And I just want to direct everyone, I'll have it in the show notes, but you're on all social media platforms and you have Dream Life Decoded, which is the best way to get a hold of you. And I love that you have 6 courses available and all kinds of ways that people can connect. So thank you for coming
Yes.
today.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure being with you, Janet, and I'd love to unpack that dream in greater detail later. But it's been a real joy to be here with you today.
It's been a joy for me too. Once I get back from my travels in a few weeks, I'll connect again with you.
Okay, sounds
Okay,
good.
sounds good. All right. Thank you so much.
All
And
right, take
try to
care.
remember what Diana told me about. Here we go. Stopping recording. All right. Thanks. See you later. Bye.
All right, thank you.